Why are we here? We're here to talk about culture and language. And we know that culture and language are important elements of any society. They serve as mechanisms through which people define themselves and from which individuals shape their identities. So what exactly is culture? We talk about culture all the time. What is culture? Culture is defined in the Merriam-Webster dictionary as the customary beliefs, social forms, and material traits of a racial, religious, or social group. It is also defined as the set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterize an institution or organization. The key points in these definitions are that culture defines a set of people, it shapes their behavior, and it informs their beliefs as well as values about themselves and the world around them. Given this definition, I have to put it very frankly and plainly, our children's identity, their sense of self, their confidence, their ability to interact with the world authentically without any shame is at stake. Let me tell you why. Many of us Africans migrate from our respective motherlands to live abroad in pursuit of our new lives and, to be honest, new opportunities. In order to successfully navigate our new society of choice, we understand that it is very crucial to assimilate to some degree and to do so relatively quickly. However, in the process of settling into our new lives, many of us find it excessively challenging to retain our cultural identity and to successfully pass on the good cultural practices and native languages to our children. I mean, the reasons why this happens spans anywhere from our demanding careers to juggling too many responsibilities and all at the same time. While this is certainly no one's fault, the children have to eat, right? Parents have to go to work, right? It's nobody's fault. But therein lies the problem. Families are not able to gather together and spend adequate time with one another. The kids have to go to school, the parents work tirelessly, everyone comes home tired and fatigued. And so the job of teaching our children about where they're from, or even simple things like teaching them a sentence or a phrase in Yoruba, in our native tongues, is usually relegated to the last slot on the very long to-do list. And I can see someone nodding because it resonates with you. Thank God for that. And against our best wishes, we are just never able to get to that last item on the to-do list. And so we keep recycling, and hopefully the next day we'll get to it. And so it becomes difficult to retain any sense of cultural identity in the diaspora for the reasons that I just mentioned. Take, for example, the current state of the Yoruba language, which I will use as a representative of other African languages. Yoruba is one of the major languages spoken in Nigeria, and in fact it's actually spoken in Togo, in Benin Republic, and even in Brazil, albeit through their spiritual practices there. It is lamentable that many adults are losing their ability to speak the language fluently, and those that can actually speak it either don't know how to teach their children or grandchildren, or choose not to speak it to their children. Why is this the case? It's a multifaceted issue. Let me go briefly down some history lane. Nigeria was colonized by the British and only gained its independence in 1960. The consequence of the colonial rule was that we, unfortunately, were taught to devalue our own languages, our rich cultures, our way of life. We were told that in order to be classified as educated and sophisticated, you had to learn to speak the perfect English. Those who grew up in Nigeria, I believe some people grew up in Nigeria here. Can I see your hands up if you did grow up in there? So quite a few, and myself included. Those who grew up in Nigeria will attest to the fact that teachers often discipline students who spoke what is referred to as vernacular. Is that true, please? Very true. And the elders and I say that respectfully, in the audience are nodding, and it's really interesting because even though I'm, one or two generations from them, I still experience the same thing. The best students would be handpicked by the teacher and given the honor to not only write down the names of noisemakers, but also to write down the names of their peers who were speaking any language other than English in school. I hope you're thinking, wow, yes, wow. Can you imagine what that kind of conditioning does to a young child? He or she would internalize the negative message that it is somehow wrong to speak his or her own language, and that this supposed offense is punishable. And what happens is that if that notion does not get challenged, that same erroneous thought process then gets passed on from one generation to the next, and that's another issue. Let's take another issue. The lack of comprehensive and engaging resources to teach or learn about African culture and languages, especially in the diaspora. If you take a look at the public school system, the only foreign languages that are available are French, Spanish. They're starting to introduce Mandarin, and sometimes they may throw in Swahili, although I haven't witnessed that. And even in this hub, the DMV hub, majority of the people here are of African descent. So there should be no reason why one of the choices for foreign languages is something like a language like Yoruba. It seems that our children, are born these days with the innate ability to operate complex devices and touchscreen devices and the latest high-tech iPhones and Android phones, and more specifically on the topic of language, the interactive toys. So in our culture, before I came up with my interactive bilingual book, I looked at the market and I realized that although these toys, these devices, these engaging sound touch devices were available in other languages, it wasn't available in African languages, particularly Yoruba. And because I'm Yoruba, I like to start with what I'm familiar with, and so that was a challenge for me, to make a resource available to our young children so that we can be competitive. Because to be quite honest with you, if you don't meet your children where they are, you lose them. And I didn't want that to be the case. And so I put my resources into bringing a book to life that hopefully will have an impact on young children. And with the videos that I consistently get, or parents excited to share with me, I know that it's making a difference. But that said, that's Yoruba. What about the other African languages? We need to work and put resources to making these devices available to our children, because again, they're so used to complex devices, they're used to high-tech devices, and so we should not be lagging behind. The third issue I have identified in the diaspora, and sadly even in Africa, is that many people want to be Western. Many people don't want to be associated with Africa, particularly because of the images that are projected through the media. I so love the lady in the back that's nodding her head. It makes me know that what I'm saying and what I'm talking about resonates with at least one person. Can I get an amen if it resonates with some of you? Okay, thank you, I appreciate it, but I love that. Please keep nodding, that's wonderful.
Could you nod one more time?
On the topic of images that are being projected, I came to this country as a young person. And even though in my formative years I lived in Nigeria and I was able to appreciate the culture and form my sense of identity, it was quite the culture shock for me to come here when I realized that one of the only perceptions or the stories that were being told about Africa was the one that many people are probably familiar with, which is a child poverty-stricken with flying around her or his head, True? True. And I remember being horrified because that wasn't the image I had of myself, but that was the image that was being projected through the media to those in the diaspora and many other people that are not from our cultures. So you can imagine as an adult being horrified and probably shrinking or cringing a little bit, how much more would that effect be on a young child who is still trying to form his or her own identity. Seeing those images, of course, why would you want to associate with Africa that is poverty-stricken and AIDS-stricken and war-stricken and disease-stricken? Why would you? Of course not, it makes sense. So I have outlined 3 problems, and I'm sure you're wondering, okay, we can go through additional problems. What exactly are the solutions? Is that right? Am I reading your mind? Please say yes, otherwise, I mean, why are we here?
Yes.
How do we get the next generation to value our culture? How do we teach our children our language, especially here in America? Let me share some thoughts with you. First, each of us must consciously, vehemently, emphatically reject the notion that African cultures are primitive. African cultures are rich and vibrant, and we must do everything in our power to ensure that they thrive. Are there things within our cultures that we don't like? Of course, no culture is perfect. But you cannot throw the baby with the bathwater. So take, for example, the Yoruba culture that dictates naming a child on the 7th day. It's known as Isomoloruko. And the Yoruba people are very intentional about naming children and typically give a child a name that's meaningful because the belief is that this child will eventually live out the meaning of his or her name. We can clap for that. Yeah. Let's take a name like Oluwafunmilayo, which means God gives me joy. Every time Oluwafunmilayo is called, what the parent or the adult or whoever is calling Oluwafunmilayo is doing is essentially speaking joy into that child's life and speaking joy into their own lives because God gives joy. Equally as deep is the naming ceremony itself, which often includes the presentation of items like water, omi. Can I hear you say omi?
Omi.
Omi. Honey, which is onyi.
Onyi.
Salt, which is iyo.
Iyo.
Palm oil, which is ekpo.
Eko.
Okay, I challenge a non-Yoruba person to pronounce the sound.
Pe.
Okay, please go ahead.
Pe.
Okay, very close, right? Very close. Now I digress, but it's very interesting because in the Yoruba language we have certain sounds that some people can't pronounce. B is one of them and P is one of them. So thank you for trying. Round of applause for her. So why do Yoruba people present these items during naming ceremonies? They're symbolic. We don't just casually do these things. There are lessons, there are symbolisms, there are things that we infer from these items. So water is somewhat ubiquitous, and everything that has life needs water to survive. So the symbolism with presenting water during a naming ceremony is that the child would not be thirsty in life, and thirsty is a way of saying that they would not strive, they would not lack, and that they would survive. Honey, which I said in Yoruba is onyi, is sweet. And so that symbolizes that the child's life will in turn be sweet. Salt, which I said is iyo, is used to add flavor to food, and so it symbolizes that a child's life would add value to those around him or her. Thank you, Ma, for nodding. I can see that this resonates with you too, so great. Ekpo, palm oil, is used to lubricate and soothe the body And so this symbolizes that the child will have a smooth and easy life with little friction. Even as I go through these symbolisms and these items and their meaning in the ceremony, I can't imagine how we as a people would allow ourselves to be convinced to discard such meaningful practices that have so much benefit not only to ourselves but to our communities as well. So this is a case for all of us to make the conscious effort to begin to reject those fallacious and erroneous notions that we have allowed ourselves to ingest about our cultural identity, our cultural heritage, and our languages. And we must do this by actively seeking out materials that challenge those notions. We must do this by reading books about our history, and not only reading books about history, but sharing what we're learning with our children. Because of what use is it for you to have something that's beneficial to you, but you're not sharing with your child? Particularly in the diaspora, where there's so many stereotypes. I've said this before, culture is a way of, it's sort of like a vehicle to introduce, to establish a child's identity and to hinge them into principles that will serve them through their lives. It helps to instill confidence in them. It helps to give them a sense of belonging. And so the onus is really on us to do our due diligence to make sure that we learn a little bit about ourselves. Actually, it's not a little, that we learn a lot about ourselves and pass it on to our children. Their sense of identity, their sense of identity, their self-esteem and confidence depends on our actions or lack thereof. A practical way of doing this would be to start with your own culture. It's okay to start, if you're Nigerian and you're Igbo, start with the Igbo culture and language. If you're Ghanaian, and you're Ga from the Ga tribe, then start with Ga. And what you find is the more you read, the more you know yourself, the more confident you are, the more you can show up into the world a little bit more authentic, and the better it would be for your children, because children watch us. They watch what we do, what we say, what we wear. So it's not enough for you to just call a child a name that's in your language. If they don't know who they are, there's no benefit to that. If they don't know what their name means, there's no benefit to that. So again, I'm challenging us all, myself included, to really do our due diligence to learn about our cultures and pass it on to our children. I do that with my kids, my husband and I. We take our children to museums that showcase African art. We pour finances into resources that can teach them about history, not only of the Yoruba people, but also just of other African cultures and other people as well, really. And this is a good segue to my second practical recommendation, is for you to buy those cultural books. If your child is struggling with math in school and you wanted them to improve their grade or you wanted them to get better, you would spend that extra time to teach them. You would spend that extra money to buy another textbook or get a tutor that can teach them and improve their grade. We can treat it this way. It's actually, in my opinion, it's important to be educated in terms of math and science and physics. I'm a pharmacist. I would never say that education is not key, it is. But cultural identity is also important. Again, in this world where a lot of people are struggling with identity, we as a people, we as adults really need to take this seriously. We really need to make sure that our children are armed and equipped with the knowledge that they need to define themselves well. Because if we don't do that, trust me, the society will, and it may not necessarily be to their benefit or yours. Another recommendation that I would provide is for us to make sure that we incorporate teaching strategies into our daily lives. So for me, as an author of a Yoruba soundbook for children, every time I pick up my children from school, I utilize that time because there's nothing I can do. It's either I listen to music or I get on the phone. But what I have decided to do, or what I do regularly, is I put on the book. I hand it to my child in the back and say, press the buttons and repeat the words back to me. And we go through that and it's fun for them. And so now I've done it so frequently that my own son, even when I don't do it, says, Mommy, I need the Yoruba lesson. When are we going to learn more words? And when are we going to do X, Y, and Z? And as amazing as it sounds, this is true. He's actually able to read Yoruba now. And you know that Yoruba is a very tonal language. Please, yes. He is. He is. I wish that I could have projected a video of him because I think sometimes visuals are better able to communicate what words may not be able to do. But believe me when I say I'm very proud of my son because he's able to read it and we go through the tones, do, re, mi. And so if I say to him, Ijapa, what is the accent, what are the accent marks on that? I say, take your time, think through it. Ijapa, can somebody tell me please? I say, can somebody tell me what, yes? Do me. Thank you, ma. Thank you, ma. And if my son was here, he will be jumping up and down and clapping because thankfully my husband and I have instilled in him this curiosity. We've engaged him. We've provided a resource for him to be able to touch and feel and see and hear. And because we put value in it, he puts value in it. If you say, oh, I want you to love yourself, but your child or your children or your grandchildren don't see you loving yourself and they don't see you wearing those African attire and they don't see you, speaking your language, then it is all a moot point. I want to give an example of how we as individuals and as a collective can change the perception about African cultures and African languages. Why is it that people would make the effort to pronounce the Austrian name, Arnold? And it has 14 letters. SCHWARZENEGGR. And yet people take the time to know how to say it and they do so properly. Whereas if it was Funke Ogunduyile, the last name is 10 letters. What often happens is people come into the classroom, maybe it's a teacher, and by the pause, you know who they're about to call.
Right.
Is that not true?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Even my name, Taye, it's just 2 syllables. And I know that the vowels can be confusing because I have A, I, and E, but it's just 3 vowels. Not a big deal. And the other thing that I refuse to do, maybe call it, being stubborn or what have you, is that I refuse to change the way my name is pronounced. So I work for a regulatory agency and I'm oftentimes in meetings and I know they always ask everyone to, introduce themselves, and oftentimes I'll hear other people that are of Nigerian descent, switching their names a little bit, making it shorter so that it's easy for other people to pronounce their name. Maybe I'm lucky that my name is just 2 syllables and 5 letters, my first name. But even if it was 20, I would still say it the way that it's supposed to be pronounced because the meaning is lost when you change the name. So it's these subtle changes. We're trying to assimilate so much, and before you know it, you've changed your name. And before you know it, you've called your children a different name. And before you know it, they reduce your name to a letter. T. Dr. T. Dr. B. But they can pronounce SCH and on. They can pronounce Romanowski. So I think if we can change the perception that our names are hard, if we instill pride in ourselves and instill that same pride in our children. Tell them what their name means. So that when they go to school, if somebody says, oh, your name is too difficult to pronounce, they can defend their name to say, my name means joy, like Ayo. Or my name means Ola, like honor. Or my name means Bola. I see there's a Bola here. Please, can you tell me the meaning of your name? Yes.
Adebola.
Adebola, okay, what's the meaning?
It's like the child comes into wealth.
The child comes into wealth. Ooh, deep. So the onus is on us to change our own perception about our culture and our language and transmit that same pride into our children. Because I keep saying this, if there's one thing that you can take from this talk, is that our children's sense of identity, their self-esteem, their confidence depends on what we do or what we do not do. And establishing a cultural identity for our young children very early is key in shaping how they view themselves and how they view the world around them. I know when I was growing up, my dad, who's here, always used to tell us, be bold, stand up tall, put up your chin. And I think that's what, helps me till today. No matter which room I'm in, I may be nervous, that's normal, but I don't cower because of my Africanness. I don't cower because of my blackness. Those labels are great, they help define me, but they don't shape me. I don't draw my value system from that. I draw my value system from my culture, from what my ancestors did. Take for example, even in the Yoruba language, we have something called oriki. Oriki literally translates to head praise. It's a poetic way of instilling pride in someone about who they are, where they're from, what their ancestors did, what is expected of them. So I would take a moment to actually do my own oriki. I hope I can do it justice. Or does somebody know how to do the Ibeji oriki? Okay. Daddy, I always look at you because I'm like, should I go with it? Should I go with...
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Let me see where I put it. It says, I know it says, Taye Ayoola-Adedeji, ẹ̀yin náà lẹ wòra yín, Taye Ayoola-Adedeji, ẹ̀yin náà lẹ wòra yín. Basically, it's a song that's just allowing twins to feel special. Because if you go back, and I'm digressing a little bit, there was such a time that twins were slaughtered, but then that got reversed, and so the Yoruba people felt that it was necessary to instill pride in the twinship, and so they came up with an oriki that we danced to. And I even remember when I used to go visit my grandmother in Ile-Ife, back in the day when I was a child with my twin sister, not a day went by without one of her friends coming to greet us and singing to us, and they would not leave until we did our dance. And so both of us would do the dance. But in that practice, we felt special, we felt unique and confident. Another thing I would say about some of the things that we do in terms of even greeting, Yoruba people are very big on greeting, and I suspect that a lot of African cultures are like that, where when you see an elderly person, you don't just walk away.
No.
You have to stop and pay your respect, and dobale, and kunle. And so in that physical demonstration of humbling yourself to do the prostrating and to do the kneeling, what you're communicating to your children is that you must respect your elders. What you're communicating to your children is that you must be humble. So that when these children start from young and then doing these cultural practices, which are especially important in the diaspora because we don't have the benefit of auntie and uncle and grandmother and grandma doing these things for us, you are the chauffeur, the cook, the teacher, the everything. So it's very important that we instill those values in them early on. My husband and I do that with our children, so every morning when they wake up, they know to come and greet us. And our hope is that by doing that, hopefully when they get older, there wouldn't be too many conflicts when we instruct them, when we give them advice, when we tell them what to do, when we guide them. The same way that I respect my father and my mother, I'm hopeful in the same way that my husband respects his parents, my in-laws, we're hoping that our children will also do the same thing. In closing, I think I need to reinforce some of the solutions that I presented today, which are that we as a people have to challenge the erroneous, fallacious notions that we are less than, or that African cultures and languages are subpar and should be relegated to the side. Instead, we need to wake up to how important we are. Wake up to how rich our cultures are. And when we wake up to that fact and we get proud about that fact, then we can more genuinely pass that on to our children. And it's only a matter of time before they themselves begin to come to you if you forget to teach them something that they were expecting you to teach them as it relates to your culture or your language. The second thing that I'll summarize is how important it is to support, to get resources. We have grandfathers and grandmothers and elderly people around us. Let's use them, utilize them, ask them questions, engage them. Meaning, engage them for your children. Get the history. Get them to tell you how they grew up, what their grandparents did, where they went to school, because these historical, shaping the historical context for your children is very important. And of course, the third thing I said was that we need to introduce these cultural practices into our daily lives. So instead of listening to another type of music, if you can, make the conscious effort to listen to songs that are by artists from your culture. So for example, I play Sunny Ade or Yinka Ayefele on the way from school when I pick up my children, because they would pick up the words as we're going. Within those 20 minutes that I pick them up, they will pick up the words, and eventually, hopefully, they will learn how to speak the language and do so fluently. So, again, if there's one message that I want you to gain from this talk, is that we as Africans, or those who are interested in African cultures, or those who are raising children who are from African cultures, must make it a priority to instill pride in our children, in establishing an identity for them, a cultural identity for them, because their sense of identity, their sense of belonging, their confidence really does depend on that. Thank you for your attention.